Take off that badge before I throw you out of my precinct." The words hit like a hammer inside the lobby of the Atlanta Police Department. Sergeant Terrell Henderson stood tall, his uniform pressed, his hand hovering near his holster. Around him, officers leaned back in their chairs, smirking, while civilians waiting in line exchanged knowing whispers. At the center of it all, Special Agent Renee Jefferson of the FBI held her ground. A black woman in her late 30s, her presence radiated calm authority. Federal credentials rested in her hand, yet the room treated her as if she were an intruder. For a moment, silence stretched. Then Renee's voice cut through the noise, precise and unshakable. "Every word you just said is being recorded by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The lobby froze. Henderson's confidence faltered, because everyone realized they had just humiliated the wrong federal agent. If you believe no federal agent should ever be treated this way, type justice below. Sergeant Terrell Henderson didn't blink. "You heard me," he said to the two uniforms at Renee's flanks. "Cuff her, now." The officers, Rojas and Whitaker, traded a glance that landed between duty and dread. Rojas swallowed. Whitaker's fingers hovered over the cuffs on his belt, trembling just enough for Renee to notice. Renee angled her shoulders to face Henderson, not the cuffs. "Sergeant," she said, even professional, "you are interfering with an active federal corruption investigation. My presence is lawful. Your order is not." Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My precinct, my rules." "Georgia isn't a sovereign nation," Renee replied. "You're still in the United States." The smirk stiffened, phones tilted upward, recording from behind purses and file folders. "Hands," Whitaker murmured, almost apologetic. Renee extended her wrists without flinching. The metal closed with two sharp clicks that sounded louder than any siren. Every gaze in the room shrank from the noise. Someone whispered, "She's FBI," and someone else replied, "Not here, she isn't." Henderson stepped closer, crowding the few inches of space she kept for herself. "Walk," he ordered. Rojas hesitated again. "Sir, procedure." "Walk," Henderson barked. She moved, not because he told her to, but because standing still would turn this into a spectacle longer than it needed to be. The cuffs bit against bone, a sting that sharpened her focus. On her right, a bulletin board listed community events. On her left, a poster read, "Professionalism, Integrity, Service." They passed it like a punchline. "Agent Jefferson," a woman's voice called from the back of the lobby. Renee didn't look, but she recognized the tone. Sympathetic civilian, mid-40s. "Do you want me to call someone?" Renee's answer was simple. "No, ma'am." "Thank you," Henderson snorted. "Call whoever you like, they'll get the same message." "What message is that?" Renee asked. "That the FBI doesn't bully my city." They reached the end of the reception counter, where the corridor to holding opened like a threat. The air cooled. A rookie at the metal detector stood straighter as they passed, eyes flicking from badge to cuffs and back again, confused about which symbol deserved respect. Renee turned her head just enough for Henderson to see the steadiness in her profile. "Sergeant, once again you are exposing your department to criminal and civil liability." "Once again," he said. "I don't care." They stopped at a secondary desk, where a booking sergeant looked up and blinked. What's this?" "Detainment," Henderson said. "For trespass, obstruction, whatever sticks." The booking sergeant shifted. "That's a federal agent." "So she keeps saying," Henderson replied. "Print an incident number." Renee spoke to the booking sergeant, not to Henderson. "Please note that my federal credentials were presented and refused. Note also that I informed Sergeant Henderson he is interfering with a federal warrant service." The booking sergeant glanced from her calm expression to Henderson's clenched jaw. "Put it in," Henderson ordered. One of the civilians at the seating row couldn't help herself. "This is going to be on the news," she whispered. A ripple of uneasy agreement moved across the lobby. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Sir, policy requires we notify—" Henderson cut him off. "Policy requires you do what I say." Renee shifted her weight, wrists lifting an inch, steel catching fluorescent glare. "Sergeant Whitaker," she said, using his title with deliberate respect, "your instincts are right. Follow them." He looked at her as if discovering a compass he'd forgotten he owned. Henderson's radio crackled. He didn't move. "Put her in interview 2, he told Rojas. "I'll be right there." Rojas nodded, apology in his eyes. He gestured toward the corridor. "This way, ma'am?" Renee walked. Each step carved a record into memory, the tile pattern, the blink of the camera above the door. She counted them, the way she'd been trained. At the threshold to interview 2, Henderson leaned in again, voice low enough for only her to hear. "You wanted a fight, Agent. Congratulations, you found one." Renee met his stare. "I didn't come for a fight, Sergeant. I came for the truth." "That's the same thing in this building," he said. "Not for long," she answered. The door opened. Cold room, metal table, 2 chairs, a mounted camera with a placid red light. Rojas removed one cuff to thread the chain through an anchor on the tabletop, then refastened it gently. "Are you comfortable?" Rojas asked. Renee exhaled once. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Back in the lobby, murmurs swelled into an uneasy buzz. A teenager raised his phone, catching the corridor as the door clicked shut. Whitaker lingered at the threshold, squared his shoulders, as if finally choosing which badge he meant to honor. The cold of interview room 2 seeped into Renee's skin through the steel cuffs. The hum of the fluorescent light overhead sounded louder than it should have, a drone meant to disorient. On the wall, the mounted camera stared down at her like an unblinking eye, its red light steady. She leaned back against the chair, spine straight. They wanted her to look uncomfortable. She refused to give them that satisfaction. The door opened. Sergeant Henderson stepped inside, closing it with deliberate slowness. He carried a file folder he hadn't bothered to open. His smirk had returned, but his eyes betrayed the irritation of a man whose control wasn't complete. "You think that line about recording scared me?" he asked. "Newsflash. I run this department. I decide what gets written down, what gets buried, and what never happened." Renee tilted her head. "And yet the recording exists. Federal evidence rules don't depend on your approval." He leaned on the table, close enough that his breath carried across. "You walk in here flashing a badge, you think people are supposed to bow. But not in Atlanta. Not in my house." "This isn't your house, Sergeant," Renee said evenly. "This is public trust. You've mistaken possession for ownership." For a beat, they stared at each other. Henderson's grin faltered just slightly. Then the intercom buzzed. "Sergeant Henderson, line 2 for you," a voice crackled. He ignored it. Renee's lips curved almost imperceptibly. They sound insistent. Henderson slammed the file onto the table and stormed out. The door clanged behind him. Across town, in a cramped federal field office, Special Agent Zoe Bradford scrolled through a batch of encrypted messages on her laptop. Zoe, younger by a decade than Renee, wore determination like armor. She'd been running background checks on Atlanta PD's procurement contracts for weeks, but now the numbers screamed corruption. 3 million in unexplained disbursements, overtime logged for officers who weren't even in the country. Her phone vibrated. A text, "She's been detained." Henderson ordered cuffs. Zoe pushed back from the desk, heart hammering. She grabbed her jacket, phone pressed to her ear before she reached the door. "This is Special Agent Bradford. Jefferson's been compromised. I need immediate authorization for escalation." The response was terse. "Proceed carefully, gather proof before intervention." She cursed under her breath. Proof she had. What she needed now was visibility. Back at the precinct, Henderson returned, flanked by 2 lieutenants. "Interview begins now," he declared, ignoring protocol. He pulled out the chair opposite Renee and sat down hard, as if weight itself could intimidate her. "You're running an illegal operation," Renee said before he spoke, "and you're nervous because you know I can prove it." The lieutenant stiffened, eyes darting to Henderson. He barked, "Shut up." But his voice lacked the certainty it had carried in the lobby. Renee leaned forward, the chain rattling softly against the table. "Every move you make here digs your hole deeper. You may bury me for an hour." "You won't bury the Bureau." One of the lieutenants cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe—" "Out," Henderson snapped. The door closed again, leaving only the 2 of them. Henderson whispered, venom lacing each word. "By the time anyone comes for you, your career will be over. You'll be the federal agent who couldn't control her own narrative." Renee's eyes locked on his. Calm. Devastating. "Or you'll be the sergeant remembered as the man who tried to handcuff the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than any chain. The longer Renee sat in interview room 2, the more the air seemed to thicken. The hum of the fluorescent light became a soundtrack to intimidation, but she wouldn't bend. The door burst open. Henderson re-entered, this time with Captain Reginald Mitchell, the precinct commander. Mitchell was older, taller, his greying hair cut short above sharp blue eyes that carried entitlement like a weapon. He studied Renee for a long moment before speaking. "So, this is the federal agent causing trouble." "Trouble?" Renee replied. "Serving a lawful warrant isn't trouble, obstructing it is." Mitchell chuckled, low and humorless. "You don't get it. This city doesn't run on Washington's rules, it runs on ours." He leaned over the table, palms flat. "You think recording devices and courtrooms will save you here? You're in my precinct, and I decide what leaves this room." Renee's calm stare never wavered. "And Washington decides what happens when a precinct forgets who it serves." Behind him, Henderson shifted, a flicker of unease at his commander's escalation. Mitchell noticed and snapped, "Don't falter now, Sergeant." "She's the one who doesn't belong." For the first time, Renee raised her voice, not in anger but with clarity that cut the air. "I belong to the law, and the law outranks both of you." The camera's red light blinked, recording every syllable. Mitchell slapped a hand over it. "Kill the feed." Silence. No one moved. Finally, Henderson muttered, "It's hardwired. We'd have to shut the grid." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Then shut the grid." At the corner of the room, Rojas and Whitaker exchanged nervous glances. The order was too much. Rojas whispered, "Sir, the whole building goes dark if we do that." "Then do it," Mitchell barked. Renee leaned back, steel cuffs clinking. "Darkness doesn't erase truth, Captain. It only proves you fear it." Meanwhile, across town, Zoe Bradford sprinted through the federal field office with a flash drive clutched in her hand. On the screen, contracts signed by Mitchell himself, linking police funds to shell companies tied to organized crime. She called into the Bureau's regional director. "We have the chain. We have the names. If Jefferson's being held, it's because she's about to blow this open." "Stay on it," the director answered, "but don't move without cover." Zoe clenched her jaw. Renee didn't have cover, not anymore. Back in interview 2, Mitchell loomed over Renee. "Here's what happens next," he said. "We process you like a common criminal. We leak it. The story becomes about a rogue agent overstepping her bounds. You'll never testify to anything again." Renee's reply was sharp, immediate. "Or the story becomes about a corrupt precinct commander silencing federal authority. And when the Bureau releases the recordings, your career ends in disgrace." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Recordings can disappear." "Not these," Renee said, her tone almost serene. For a heartbeat, his confidence faltered. He didn't know why, but she did, because the trap had already been set. The federal field office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner, but Zoe Bradford barely noticed. Her desk was buried under stacks of procurement reports, payroll logs, and subpoenaed bank records. The numbers screamed corruption. 3 officers listed as working double shifts had actually been overseas. Several contracts for community equipment led to shell companies with no employees and no addresses beyond rented mailboxes. And every paper trail curved back to the same signature, Captain Reginald Mitchell. Zoe typed rapidly, building a timeline, her eyes flicking between monitors. Renee had been right. The rot wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Mitchell's control of the precinct wasn't about law enforcement. It was about empire. Her phone buzzed. A secure text. "She's in custody." Henderson ordered the grid shut down. Zoe muttered, "Damn it," and grabbed her jacket. She dialed the Bureau's regional director again. "We're past careful. If Jefferson is silenced in there, we lose the only chance to stop Mitchell before he covers his tracks." "Zoe," the director's voice came heavy with warning, "without visual confirmation, you can't escalate." "I have visual," she snapped. "Dozens of civilians in that lobby are recording. Henderson can't stop every phone." "Silence then. Gather them, validate them. But do not walk into that precinct alone." She ended the call, adrenaline burning through her. Alone or not, she knew she was going. At the precinct, the atmosphere was electric. The lobby buzzed with whispers. Civilians who'd come to file reports now sat stiff, clutching their phones like shields. A teenager live-streamed quietly from the corner, her voice shaking as she whispered commentary into the mic. This federal agent, they've got her locked in the back. They cuffed her right here, I swear I saw it. Look, that's the sergeant who ordered it. Henderson stormed past, barking into his radio. He snatched the phone from the teenager's hands, glaring. Delete it, she swallowed hard. It's already online. His face drained of color, just slightly. He shoved the phone back and moved on, fury tightening his stride. Inside interview 2, the lights flickered as the grid was partially cut. Cameras across the building blinked out, but the one above Renee's head stayed steady, its red light unwavering. Mitchell cursed. Why is this one still running? Separate circuit, Rojas offered. Evidence locker feed. Shut it down, Mitchell growled. We can't, Whitaker said, voice firmer now. It's hardwired to federal cloud storage. If you touch it, you'll trigger an alert. Mitchell's eyes sliced toward him. Are you refusing a direct order? Whitaker swallowed, but stood straighter. I'm following policy, sir. Renee felt the smallest surge of satisfaction. Cracks in the wall. Zoe arrived outside the precinct 15 minutes later, parking 2 blocks away. She carried a go-bag slung over her shoulder. Inside it, a portable scanner, encrypted drives and a flash drive loaded with Mitchell's forged contracts. She wasn't reckless. She was calculated. From across the street, she filmed the entrance. Officers stood stiff at the doors, posture defensive. A crowd was gathering. Journalists, tipped by the live stream, hovered with cameras ready. Zoe smiled grimly. Visibility was their best weapon. Back inside, Mitchell slammed his fist against the metal table. Agent Jefferson, do you understand what happens when you lose the trust of your peers? You'll be the laughingstock of law enforcement. No judge will take your evidence seriously after today. Renee raised an eyebrow. That assumes I walk out of here empty-handed. His laugh was bitter. Walk out? That depends on how cooperative you are. Henderson leaned in, trying to reclaim authority. We can charge you trespass, obstruction, impersonation. Impersonation? Renee repeated, her voice cutting like glass. She lifted her cuffed wrists an inch, chain rattling. My badge is real, my jurisdiction is real. The only thing fake in this room is your integrity. Whitaker exhaled sharply, like a man suppressing agreement. Mitchell's glare burned through him. Leave. No, sir, Whitaker said before he could stop himself. His voice trembled, but the words stood. This isn't right. The room went silent. Henderson's jaw tightened. Mitchell's nostrils flared. Renee's eyes gleamed. In the lobby, civilians cheered quietly as the livestream count climbed into the thousands. And at her vantage point outside, Zoe whispered, They just handed us the narrative. The metal table in interview room 2 still hummed faintly from Mitchell's fist. The air was thick with rage, tension, and the weight of too many witnesses on the wrong side of history. Renee sat perfectly still, her wrists chained, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, her voice quiet but resonant. Captain Mitchell, Sergeant Henderson, you've been speaking freely, assuming this is your fortress. But everything you've said, the orders, the threats, the admissions, it's already out there. Henderson laughed, loud and cruel. Out where? We cut the feeds. Renee's lips curved, almost imperceptibly. Not all of them. She lifted her cuffed hands an inch. From the seam of her blazer sleeve, a thin wire slipped free, barely visible against the table's steel surface. Mitchell's eyes widened. What the hell is that? A federal-grade microtransmitter, Renee said calmly, streaming directly to bureau servers. This room has been live since the moment you threatened me in the lobby. The silence that followed was seismic. Rojas blinked hard. Whitaker swore under his breath. Even Henderson's swagger cracked, his eyes darting toward the camera light that refused to die. Mitchell recovered first, slamming his palm flat. You're bluffing. Renee tilted her head. Do I look like I'm bluffing? The red light above glowed brighter, almost mocking him. In the lobby, whispers erupted as notifications buzzed on civilian phones. A link spread like wildfire. Live FBI agent detained in Atlanta precinct. The teenager who had been streaming gasped. She's broadcasting. Oh my God, she's broadcasting from inside. A chorus of voices rose, some horrified, others emboldened. Journalists rushed forward, cameras flashing. The story was no longer local, it was national. Outside, Zoe Bradford nearly stumbled as her phone vibrated. She opened the Bureau Secure app and saw it, a live feed encrypted, pouring evidence into federal servers. Renee's calm voice carried through her earbuds like a war drum. "She did it," Zoe whispered. "She set the trap." She pressed speed dial. "Director, this is Bradford. We have confirmation. Live broadcast, audio and video, time-stamped. Federal servers are receiving everything." The director's voice, usually cautious, sharpened with purpose. "Good. Hold position. We're moving on the precinct." Zoe exhaled, the weight lifting. Renee wasn't cornered. She was in control. Back inside, Henderson snapped. He lunged across the table, grabbing at the wire. Renee didn't flinch. "You think you can erase the truth by tearing it from my sleeve?" she asked. "It's too late. America is already watching." Henderson's face twisted, rage boiling over. "You think this makes you a hero?" Renee's voice was cold steel. "No. It makes me an agent doing her job, exposing corruption, protecting the people this badge was meant to serve." Mitchell pounded the door. "Cut the feed. Shut it down now." Rojas shook his head. "We can't, sir. It's on multiple channels. Once it hit the Bureau cloud, it mirrored to civilian networks." Whitaker added quieter, "It's over." The commander's face drained of color. In that moment, Renee Jefferson, cuffed, mocked, humiliated, wasn't the one trapped. Henderson and Mitchell were, and the whole world was about to see it. The red light above interview room 2 continued its steady glow, a small beacon that felt more powerful than any badge or gun. Renee sat chained to the table, but her calmness radiated like armor. Across from her, Captain Reginald Mitchell's composure crumbled. He slammed the table again, his knuckles white. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've endangered ongoing cases. You've put officers at risk. You've compromised this entire precinct." Renee tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "What I've done," she said slowly, "is ensure that corruption, abuse, and unlawful detainment don't stay hidden behind these walls. What I've done is protect the Constitution that you swore to uphold." Her words landed like strikes. Henderson paced near the door, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum. Sweat dotted his forehead, his bravado shrinking. The man who had barked orders in the lobby now muttered under his breath, "This is a setup. She planned this. She—" "Yes," Renee interrupted, her voice cutting sharp. "I planned for obstruction. I planned for arrogance. What I didn't plan for was how far you'd go in proving me right." Rojas coughed into his fist, looking anywhere but at Mitchell. Whitaker's jaw clenched, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his eyes met Renee's as if silently apologizing. Meanwhile, in the precinct lobby, the atmosphere boiled. Civilians shifted restlessly, phones in hand. The teenager who had live-streamed earlier now spoke directly into her camera, her voice steadier. "They think they can hide this, but you're all seeing it. This agent, she's FBI, and they cuffed her. They tried to shut down the building, but look," she angled her phone toward the buzzing crowd of journalists. "The world is here now." One reporter shouted questions at officers who blocked the hallway. "Why is a federal agent being held? Under whose authority?" Cameras clicked, flashes brightened the air, and the officers shifted uncomfortably. Outside, Zoe Bradford pushed through the swelling crowd, her badge flashing at chest level. She moved like a blade through fabric, slicing between bodies, eyes locked on the glass doors. An officer blocked her path. "No entry." Zoe flashed credentials. "Federal agent. You're obstructing justice. Step aside." The officer hesitated, torn between orders and fear of consequences. Behind Zoe, chants rose, "Let her out! Let her out!" The officer stepped back. Zoe entered. Mitchell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, face tightening. "We're trending," he muttered. Renee allowed herself a small smile. "Good. Sunshine is the best disinfectant." Mitchell snapped his gaze up. "You think this ends with applause? The Bureau will bury this feed. They'll deny authorization. You'll be painted as a rogue, insubordinate agent acting without clearance." Renee leaned forward, the chain rattling softly. "Try. The Bureau already has copies, and the public has copies." You can't unring a bell, Captain. What's done is done. Henderson slammed his fist against the wall. We can still charge her, discredit her before... Whitaker's voice cut him off, firm for the first time. Sergeant, that's enough. The room froze. Henderson turned, disbelief flooding his face. What did you say? Whitaker swallowed hard, but didn't retreat. This isn't what I signed up for. We don't lock up federal agents to cover corruption. I'm not losing my career for this. Mitchell's eyes narrowed into knives. You'll lose more than your career if you open your mouth. Renee's gaze flicked to Whitaker. The truth protects better than silence. The door to interview 2 burst open. Zoe Bradford strode in, her badge raised, her voice clear. Federal Agent Zoe Bradford, DOJ liaison, this ends now. Mitchell stood, outrage simmering. You have no jurisdiction here. Zoe cut him off, stepping closer to the table where Renee sat cuffed. Jurisdiction, she echoed. This entire precinct is on live broadcast across the country. Jurisdiction is no longer your shield. It's your indictment. She placed the flash drive on the table with a sharp click. Signed contracts, fraudulent disbursements, shell companies. Captain Mitchell, this is your handwriting, your approvals, your empire. Mitchell's face drained. Henderson's eyes darted to the folder, panic clawing through his mask. Renee lifted her chin. Thank you, Zoe. Zoe met her eyes, the corners of her mouth twitching. Always. The tension snapped. Mitchell lunged for the flash drive, but Zoe scooped it back into her pocket. This isn't for you anymore, it's for Washington, and for every civilian in that lobby with a camera. Rojas stepped forward. Sir, the Bureau's already here, we're cooked. Mitchell roared, shut your mouth. No, Rojas said louder this time. You shut yours. You've dragged this entire department into the gutter. Whitaker added, and I won't follow you into it. For the first time, Mitchell looked small. His command fractured in real time, authority bleeding out of him like a wound. The chants in the lobby swelled, vibrating the walls. Justice! 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 News vans screeched to curbs outside, reporters flooding sidewalks with microphones raised. Zoe glanced at Renee. They're not just watching anymore, they're demanding action. Renee's eyes burned steady. Then let's give them the truth. Mitchell sagged into the chair, his bluster gone, replaced with cold calculation. You think you've won because of a broadcast and a few signatures, but the Bureau plays politics. Evidence disappears, narratives flip. You'll see. Renee leaned forward, her voice like iron. Then let this be clear. Even if every file vanished, every video deleted, what happened here lives in the memory of every person watching. You can't scrub conscience. The words hung heavy, undeniable. Mitchell had no answer. Henderson had no swagger. For the first time since the cuffs snapped, Renee felt the scales shift. The first siren wasn't a local squad car. It carried the steadier wail of unmarked federal SUVs as they rolled past news vans and stopped at hard angles along the curb. Doors flew open. Agents in Navy windbreakers poured out, FBI, DOJ block letters flashing in the noon sun. A field commander pointed, splitting teams with crisp hand signals, perimeter, lobby, evidence control. Inside, the crowd parted. The teenager with the live stream whispered, "They're here." Phones lifted by instinct. Zoe Bradford cleared the detectors with a federal stack behind her. "Federal warrant service," the lead agent announced, voice carrying. "Captain Reginald Mitchell, Sergeant Terrell Henderson, step forward. All other personnel, stand down and keep hands visible." Henderson squared his shoulders. "You have no authority to interrupt operations in this building." Zoe raised paperwork edged with judicial seals. Signed by a federal magistrate 10 minutes ago, emergency orders for preservation of evidence, suspension of command authority, and immediate custody of implicated personnel. Whitaker looked from the warrants to Henderson and back, conflict skimming his features. Rojas exhaled, lifted both palms. "Standing down." A ripple moved through the room. One by one, officers withdrew hands from belts. "Sergeant Henderson," the lead agent said, softer now that momentum had shifted. "Remove your duty weapon and place it on the desk." Henderson glanced toward Mitchell's office, then unlatched the holster and set the Glock down with a clack. From the corridor, Captain Mitchell appeared, uniform perfect, expression iron. He took in the federal stack, the papers, the eyes. "This circus ends in 5 minutes," he said. "You will leave and apologize to my officers." "No, Captain," Zoe replied, tone almost gentle. "This ends with accountability." The lead agent nodded to 2 others. "Interview 2. They pivoted down the hall. Inside interview room 2, Renee listened. Boots, radio hiss, federal cadence, before the door opened. "Agent Jefferson," the lead agent said, already reaching for the key. "On authority of the United States, you are released from unlawful restraint." The cuffs snapped open. Relief sharpened rather than softened her. She rotated her wrists once and stood. "Evidence in this room has streamed to bureau servers since the initial threat in the lobby," she said. "Mirror to public channels initiated 21 minutes ago." "Confirmed," the second agent replied, checking a handheld. "Chain of custody is clean, body cams rolling." Zoe stepped into the doorway. For a beat, the 2 women simply met eyes. "You good?" Zoe asked. Renee nodded. "Better than they are." They exited. Henderson stood weaponless. Mitchell planted himself a few feet away, refusing to yield even an inch. "Captain Mitchell," the lead agent said, letting the warrants hang at eye level, "you are placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending federal investigation. Surrender your badge and weapon and accompany us for questioning." Mitchell barked a humorless laugh. "You come in with cameras and paper and think it strips me of command?" "No one stripped you of command," Renee said. "You gave it away one choice at a time." Mitchell glanced at the camera above the hall, caught the steady red light, and understood. His voice no longer belonged to him. He ripped his badge off and tossed it. It clattered, spun, lay still. "There," he snapped. "Take it." "We want integrity," Zoe said. "They're not the same." 2 agents collected the badge and weapon. Henderson edged toward his pistol on the desk. "Don't," Whitaker said, stepping across his path. He met the sergeant's eyes. "Not another bad decision today." Henderson withdrew his hand. "Escort Sergeant Henderson to holding," the lead agent ordered. "Processed for obstruction and assault on a federal officer pending review." As cuffs slid around Henderson's wrists, clean, controlled, he spat defiance he didn't own anymore. "You think the city will take the Bureau's side over its own cops?" "No," Renee said even. "People will take the truth side." The procession moved toward the lobby. The sound met them first, a human roar with sharp edges. Doors opened. The room swelled with bodies and screens and the glitter of lenses. Renee stepped into the threshold. For a heartbeat, the roar thinned into a hush. She stood straight, wrist marks visible, gaze steady. "This isn't about one badge or one building," she said, voice carrying without strain. "It's about the people this place exists to serve, and the promise that power answers to the law." Zoe turned the receptionist's counter into a podium and laid the flash drive beside the warrants. "For press," she said to a civilian liaison, "filing numbers and preservation orders. Body cam footage will be available through the U.S. Attorney's Office per policy." A reporter shouted, "Agent Bradford, is this the end of the investigation or the beginning?" "The beginning." Another voice, "Agent Jefferson, what do you say to officers who followed orders and now feel betrayed?" Renee looked toward Whitaker and Rojas. "Do the right thing now. That's what lasts." Behind the counter, a clerk hurried over, eyes wide. "Ma'am, Agent Bradford, someone just tried to purge the record server. The system logged a failed wipe and a remote access attempt." Zoe's head snapped toward the interior corridor. "From where?" "The evidence locker terminal," the clerk said, "but the credentials weren't local. They were pushed from outside." Renee and Zoe traded a look. If the attempt wasn't local, Mitchell's operation wasn't either. "Secure the evidence locker," the lead agent said, signaling a team. "Lock the server room. No one in or out without federal escort." Agents moved. 2 peeled off down the hall. Another posted at the stairwell. The building shifted, ballast changing. Renee's phone vibrated, a secure ping from D.C. The text was short. "Interim review shows overlapping disbursements in 3 additional precincts. Possible regional network." She passed the phone to Zoe. Zoe read it, jaw tightening. "What is it?" a reporter called. Zoe kept her voice measured. "The warrants here stand. The investigation continues." Renee turned slightly, letting her words reach Whitaker and Rojas. This is bigger than one station. How big? Whitaker asked. Renee didn't answer. The lights hummed, cameras held steady. Open doors framed federal jackets and a city deciding who it wanted to be. An agent jogged back from the evidence corridor. "Ma'am, you need to see this." They moved Renee Zoe, the lead agent, past the booking desk to the evidence room. A terminal glowed with a map of expenditures and dotted lines linking vendors to accounts. It looked like a subway diagram, if subways ran on cash and favors. "These aren't just shell companies," the tech said, fingers flying. "They're mirrored through a non-profit that funnels grants to multiple jurisdictions. Same signatures, same amounts to the cent." "And the approvals?" Zoe asked. Click. A list populated, names, dates, initials. Mitchell's appeared, so did others. Renee read them once, then again. "This isn't just Atlanta." "No," the tech said, "it's not even just Georgia." In the lobby, someone started a chant again, softer, almost like a prayer. "Justice, justice, justice." Renee straightened. The red camera light in the corner held steady like a pulse. The broadcast had begun with one precinct. Now it had to decide whether to end with a nation. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on Sergeant Henderson was different from when they'd snapped around Renee's wrists. This time, it wasn't humiliation. It was accountability. The agents escorting him walked with measured pace, their body cams blinking green. Henderson's jaw clenched, but the bravado had drained out of him like water from a cracked pipe. Reporters swarmed forward, shouting questions. "Sergeant Henderson, do you admit to ordering the unlawful detention? Do you regret your actions against Agent Jefferson? Was Captain Mitchell complicit?" He didn't answer. Each step he took toward the waiting SUV was filmed from 10 different angles, recorded on hundreds of phones, streamed to thousands of screens. Inside the precinct, Captain Reginald Mitchell refused to move. He stood in the center of his office, arms crossed, eyes locked on the federal agents in front of him. The walls behind him were decorated with commendations, framed photos with city officials, plaques commemorating years of service. "You parade me out those doors in cuffs," he said, "and you drag this city's reputation into the mud." "No, Captain," Renee said, stepping into the office beside Zoe. "You did that when you chose corruption over service. We're just cleaning up the mess." Mitchell's face twitched, a crack in the armor. "You think the Bureau will thank you for this? You think they'll put your face on a podium? No. They'll bury you the second the politics get rough." Renee held his gaze steady. "Maybe, but they can't bury the truth, not anymore. Not with thousands of eyes watching in real time." Zoe placed a recorder on the desk, its red light blinking. "Captain Mitchell, you are being placed under federal custody pending charges of obstruction, conspiracy, and misuse of public funds. You have the right to remain silent." Mitchell's jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. When the cuffs closed around his wrists, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, the man who had ruled this precinct like a kingdom looked small. Back in the lobby, the lead federal agent called for quiet. "We'll take no more questions until Agent Jefferson has given her statement." The crowd surged forward, microphones extended, phones raised high. Renee stepped onto the small rise near the front desk, Zoe at her side. "My name is Special Agent Renee Jefferson," she began, her voice carrying steady over the din. "Earlier today I was unlawfully detained by officers of this precinct while serving a federal corruption investigation. What began as an attempt to silence me has become proof of what too many already suspected, that systems meant to protect the people were being twisted for personal gain." Cameras clicked. A hush spread, the kind that comes when history bends. "I want to be clear," she continued. "Not every officer here participated. Some stood up, even when it meant risking their careers. Others stayed silent. And silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. Today we've taken the first step toward restoring trust, but this is not the end. It is the beginning of a broader investigation that will extend beyond these walls." She paused, letting her words settle. In the silence, someone whispered justice, and the word rippled outward until the crowd chanted it. While Mitchell and Henderson were loaded into separate vehicles, Whitaker and Rojas were pulled aside by federal agents. "You'll be debriefed," one agent said. "Full statements, sworn testimony. If you cooperate, it will matter." Rojas nodded immediately. "I'll talk. I won't go down for what they did." Whitaker hesitated, then glanced at Renee. She gave a single, small nod. His shoulders dropped, the tension leaving. "I'll testify," he said. In the corner of the lobby, the teenager who had streamed the first video wiped tears from her cheeks. "They tried to shut her up," she told her phone's camera. But she fought back, and she won. By evening, the footage had reached every major news outlet. Anchor desks replayed the moment Renee revealed the transmitter, the second Henderson snapped cuffs around her wrists, the instant Mitchell's badge clattered across his office floor. Commentators debated in split screens. This is unprecedented. An FBI agent humiliated, then vindicated, live. Systemic or isolated? On social media, hashtags surged. Justice for Renee. Federal truth. Atlanta integrity. In Washington, the Bureau's director gave a carefully worded statement. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not tolerate interference in lawful investigations. We will cooperate fully with oversight committees to ensure transparency. But behind closed doors, politicians whispered, if corruption had reached this precinct, how many others were infected? That night, Zoe sat across from Renee in the federal field office, the chaos of the day settling into fatigue. A stack of evidence drives sat between them, glowing faintly under fluorescent light. "You realize this isn't over," Zoe said. "We've got names we haven't touched yet. Mitchell's signature shows up in contracts linked to 3 other precincts. This could unravel half the state." Renee nodded. "Then we keep pulling the thread, however far it goes." Zoe smiled faintly. "You never flinched today, not once." Renee exhaled. "I couldn't. If I flinched, they'd win, and too many people were watching." In the holding cell, Henderson sat on the bench, his uniform wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "We should have shut her down," he muttered. Mitchell glared at him. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Neither man realized the cell had its own camera, rolling, transmitting everything they said. Outside the glass, Zoe turned to Renee. "Poetic." Renee's lips curved slightly. "Justice has a sense of humor." 2 weeks later, the wood-paneled chamber of Atlanta's federal courthouse was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, sketch artists hunched over pads, and cameras waited outside the heavy oak doors. At the front sat Judge Evelyn Harper, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, known for her intolerance of theatrics. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the defense table where Captain Mitchell and Sergeant Henderson sat in tailored suits instead of uniforms. Their shackles had been removed for appearances, but the weight of disgrace clung to them heavier than iron. The court recognizes these proceedings as the preliminary hearing in United States versus Mitchell and Henderson, Judge Harper announced. The gallery hushed. Renee Jefferson was the first to testify. She stood tall at the witness stand, right hand raised, her oath ringing clear. The courtroom felt the gravity of her words as she recounted step by step how she had been detained, threatened, and silenced. "They believed no one would ever hold them accountable," she said, steady. "But the truth doesn't disappear in the dark. It survives. It surfaces." The prosecutor held up the recorder, the same one Renee had activated in interview room 2. Thence blinking light on the playback screen became the centerpiece of the government's case. The jury watched Henderson's sneer, Mitchell's threats, the very moment the captain ordered the power grid cut. Gasps rippled through the room. Next came Officer Rojas, then Whitaker. Their voices carried the tone of men caught between regret and relief. "I followed orders too long," Whitaker confessed. "I told myself I was just surviving. But surviving isn't the same as serving. Agent Jefferson reminded me of that." Their testimonies painted a picture not just of 2 corrupt men, but of a culture allowed to fester unchecked. Outside the courthouse, giant screens replayed highlights from the proceedings. Crowds gathered daily, chanting slogans, carrying signs, "Truth over power, justice in uniform, no one above the law." Social media exploded with clips. One video of Renee saying, "The law outranks both of you," reached 5 million views in a week. Late-night hosts quoted her words. Students printed them on protest banners. What began on a train platform in Chicago, an act of discrimination against 2 girls in school blazers, had grown into a national conversation about race, power, and accountability in American policing. In Washington, senators demanded hearings. If it happened here, one declared, we must ask where else federal agents have been obstructed, silenced, or threatened. Local politics shook as well. The city's police commissioner announced his resignation under mounting pressure. 3 city council members tied to Mitchell's funding network were subpoenaed. "This is bigger than 2 men," Zoe told a CBS anchor during a live interview. "We've uncovered evidence that the corruption stretched through procurement systems, training contracts, and non-profit grants. Today's case is the first domino." That evening, Renee walked alone through the nearly empty courthouse corridor. Her heels clicked softly against marble as the noise of the crowd outside faded. She paused by a window overlooking the city lights. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a deep exhale. Zoe appeared beside her, 2 coffee cups in hand. She passed one over. "You looked unshakable on that stand." "I wasn't," Renee admitted, wrapping her hands around the cup's warmth. "Every time they played back that footage, I felt the cuffs again, but I couldn't let them see that." Zoe studied her a moment, then smiled. "Doesn't matter, you won." Renee shook her head. "The people won, I was just the one caught in the middle." The hearing ended with Mitchell and Henderson being denied bail. They were led out not as commanders, but as defendants, their futures hanging on a trial date already circled on calendars across the nation. Judge Harper's gavel fell. Court adjourned. The gallery erupted in chatter, reporters rushing for the exits to file stories. Renee remained seated, watching the 2 men disappear through the side door. For the first time since her unlawful detention, she felt the system working. Not perfectly, not fully, but moving in the right direction. Later that night, Renee and Zoe returned to the federal field office. A fresh set of files waited. New names, new precincts, new threads in the web they had begun to unravel. Zoe placed the stack on the desk between them. "This doesn't stop here." Renee nodded slowly, a steel edge still in her voice. "Then neither do we." The camera of the imagination pulled back. The city skyline glittering, the courthouse dome lit in pale gold, chants still echoing faintly from the streets below. The fight was far from over, but a line had been drawn. And this time, the world was watching. 3 weeks after the Atlanta hearings, headlines no longer carried only Mitchell and Henderson's names. Across the nation, other precincts were under scrutiny. Procurement records matched. Training contracts linked. A network of corruption surfaced like oil seeping to the top of water. In Chicago, reporters uncovered ties between local commanders and the same shell companies Mitchell had used. In Houston, a city councilman abruptly resigned when federal auditors traced campaign funds back to inflated police overtime budgets. Every revelation traced back to the moment Renee Jefferson refused to be silenced. The Senate Judiciary Committee convened an emergency hearing. Cameras rolled as senators grilled bureau officials, demanding accountability. One senator leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Agent Jefferson, do you realize your actions have sparked the largest police oversight investigation in 2 decades? Renee, seated at the witness table in a navy blazer, answered without hesitation. "I realize corruption thrives in silence, and silence is no longer an option." Gasps and applause erupted from the audience section, despite the chairman's gavel pounding for order. On evening news shows, Renee's face became familiar. Analysts debated her every word, some praising her courage, others questioning if she had gone too far. One commentator remarked, "She wasn't just standing against Mitchell. She was standing against a culture that enabled him." On social media, artwork of Renee spread, murals painted in Detroit, hashtags trending globally. Students quoted her in speeches. Protesters carried banners with her words, "The law outranks both of you." But fame brought scrutiny. Old case files were dredged up. Critics accused her of ambition. Political operatives whispered that she might run for office one day. Through it all, Renee stayed silent outside official channels, letting the work speak louder than speculation. In the bureau field office, Zoe spread files across a long conference table. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a map dotted with pins. "Every precinct tied to Mitchell's contracts forms a line across 3 states. This wasn't sloppy corruption. It was coordinated." Renee frowned. "Which means someone higher up sanctioned it." "Or someone outside law enforcement," Zoe countered. She held up a memo. This contractor doesn't just supply uniforms, they've got ties to political donors. The realization chilled them both. This wasn't just a police scandal, it was a political machine. Outside the Beltway, public pressure swelled. In New York, crowds gathered in front of City Hall chanting Renee's name. In Los Angeles, protesters demanded audits of every police contract. At a high school in Atlanta, students held a rally. Two young girls in Wellington prep blazers, Shanice and Renee Beaumont, the same twins who had been barred from boarding the luxury train months earlier, spoke to the crowd. "They told us we didn't belong," Shanice said into the microphone, "but today, because one woman refused to back down, we know we do." The crowd roared, their voices echoing across the courtyard. Not everyone celebrated. Behind closed doors, lobbyists strategized, lawmakers whispered, and shadowy figures sought to discredit Renee. Anonymous sources leaked stories hinting at disciplinary issues. Op-eds accused her of destabilizing public trust in law enforcement, but each attempt to smear her was met with louder voices of support. When one network ran a hit piece, social media erupted with the hashtag #OneStandWithRenee. Late one night, Renee sat in her small apartment scrolling through messages. Some were threats, others were thanks. She lingered on one sent by a mother in Detroit. "My son is alive today because you spoke up. Thank you." She closed her laptop and whispered to the empty room. "That's why." Back in Washington, Zoe entered Renee's office, carrying a thick dossier. "We've got it," she said. "A direct link. Mitchell's contracts tie into a national procurement chain. And at the top?" She dropped the folder on the desk. "A senator." Renee opened the file. The name inside made her pause. A powerful figure, publicly tough on crime, privately profiting from corruption. She exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't the end. It's the beginning of the real fight." Zoe nodded grimly. "And it's going to shake the country." The Senate chamber was silent as Renee Jefferson entered, every eye following her steps. The hearing had drawn national attention, and the room overflowed with cameras, reporters, and aides scribbling furiously. At the far end sat Senator Marcus Kincaid, his silver hair neatly combed, his face the portrait of defiance. He had built a career on law and order rhetoric, but the files in Zoe's hands told a different story. Years of contracts funneled through shell companies, millions siphoned under the banner of public safety. Renee placed the dossier on the long oak table. "The evidence is clear," she said, her voice steady. "This network wasn't isolated to one precinct, one city, or one captain. It was systemic, enabled by men in positions of power who believed they were untouchable. That ends today." Kincaid leaned back, forcing a smile, but his fingers drummed nervously against the armrest. "You're overreaching, Agent Jefferson. These are accusations, nothing more." "Accusations backed by contracts with your signature," Zoe countered, her words sharp as glass. She slid copies across the table, each stamped and authenticated. "Procurement deals, donor exchanges, favors traded for silence. You built your reputation on integrity while bleeding the very system you claimed to protect." A murmur spread through the chamber. Cameras zoomed closer. Senators leaned forward, sensing the shift in tide. Kincaid's composure cracked when one of his own colleagues demanded, "Did you profit from these contracts, Senator?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence was damning. Renee didn't gloat. She simply stood, unflinching, as the gavel struck, and the chairman announced the opening of a full federal investigation. The senator who had mocked accountability was now its captive, his empire collapsing under the weight of exposure. Outside, the news broke instantly. Crowds filled the steps of the Capitol, chanting, cheering, holding signs painted overnight. "Truth won't be silenced." Reporters spoke of a scandal spanning states, of reforms already being drafted. Commentators called it the dawn of a new era of oversight. In the middle of it all, Renee found herself standing on the steps, the sun setting behind her. Zoe came to her side, exhaustion etched into her face but relief flickering in her eyes. "It's over," she said quietly. Renee shook her head. "No, it's only the beginning. Corruption doesn't vanish in a single trial. But now the country knows it can be fought. That matters." The crowd spotted her and a chant began spreading until it swallowed the entire plaza. Her name echoed off stone walls and marble columns. not as a celebrity but as a symbol. Renee raised her hand once, acknowledging them, then lowered it, retreating into the anonymity of purpose. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, she removed her blazer and sat at her desk. The city lights blinked beyond the window. On her phone, messages piled up, requests for interviews, endorsements, appearances. She ignored them. Instead, she opened the latest case file Zoe had sent over. Another contract, another pattern, another thread to pull. Her work wasn't finished, and maybe it never would be. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She remembered the cuffs snapping around her wrists, the smirks in the precinct lobby, the voices that had tried to reduce her to silence. And she remembered the moment she looked up and said, "Every word you just said is being recorded." That moment had lit a fuse, and the fire had spread across the country. She wasn't naive enough to think the flames would burn everything corrupt away, but they had illuminated the darkness, and that was enough to keep walking forward. She poured a glass of water, leaned back and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Tomorrow the fight would continue, but tonight justice had won.